Hello, I'm Alice Hiller, and this is Voicing Our Silences. A very warm welcome to our Broken Sleep book special, featuring the wonderful Wendy Allen and Serge Neptune. As you'd expect from this press, Serge and Wendy are poets to whom risk-taking comes as naturally as breathing. Also instinctive to both of them is the language of the bodily self as a political space. Turning to Serge Neptune first, merman extraordinaire, he's a fin-tailed, London-based queer poet, mentor and producer. He created and hosts the inimitable Neptune's Glitter House for Wayward Poets, which made lockdown a lot more bearable for his many fans, myself included. He also chaired a celebration of queer writing with Andrew Macmillan, Mary Jean Chan, and Paul Mendes for the Cheltenham Literary Festival. So we're in very experienced hands tonight. Serge's These Queer Mer Boys was published with Broken Sleep Books in 2020. I absolutely loved reviewing it for Harana Poetry. Moving, visceral and tender, its poems hold the watery and land-based worlds of mer boys and men, whose sky is a ceiling of white paper cuts, and where a smack of jellyfish rises up to shake the sea crest, calling to life a dream of hedonism, where touch becomes a flurry of honeyed fingers. Serge's poems are equally alert to the harms which can stalk rainbow lives. Recording societal and familial hostilities, Serge also explores queer on queer predation. Overall, a campaigning, inspiring, ferocious read, as you'll be discovering shortly. Singingly fresh and audacious, with a razor-sharp wit, Wendy Allen is no less precise or visceral than Serge when it comes to speaking through and with the body. Her powerful poems have been widely published and commended in many competitions. The Tricolor textbook, her debut with Broken Sleep, sold out before I could even get a copy, but if you contact Wendy or I, you'll be able to get a PDF. You can contact us through the Voicing Our Silences website. The poem Wendy gave us for our website is titled, "Why Do People Take Photographs of Men Surfing and Not My Orgasm as It Peaks?" Which seems to me like a good question. The poem sets the scene by revealing my nipples are blushed boys as they bob on the slowing wave of you. This is a world whose rose tint is more likely to be a post-coital glow or dilute menstrual fluids than anything from the garden. Beautifully open to foreignness, the expansions of travel, and the possibilities of play in all its forms, Wendy's essential work also holds a charge of anger and grief at the vast continents of female experience that have been excluded from art making, even as female youth and perceived beauty have been relentlessly exploited. Like Serge's, her poems are forensic, redemptive, and generous, as you'll be able to discover for yourselves. I now hand you over to the amazing Wendy Allen and Serge Neptune.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you first of all for putting this together and for asking me and Wendy, and thank you for a wonderful review. Many people can only dream of a review such as the one you wrote for a run of poetry about my pamphlet, and so I'm eternally grateful. And thank you to all of you for being here. It's so wonderful to see you. So I'm going to read from my first pamphlet, These Queer Boys, which I have neglected a bit for writing, new stuff, but I'm going back to it tonight. So yes, it's a pamphlet where I explore queerness through mermen and merpeople. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of water in this. Also you can't, of course, smell it, but I doused myself in Mugler because I'm very classy. I'm a very classy merman. So yes, and I'm going to screen share as well. So let's see. Right. Last time my lover came inside me. After months we hadn't seen each other, and thirst gripped his throat. He seemed anxious, impatient to reassure me that they were happy, that she made him happy, that her milk-flot skin was enough, even when it failed to arouse him. When he pounded full force inside me, he shouted her name. Yet he moaned at the brusque friction of my scales, my viscous fishtail that coiled around his waist. I would wear him all over me, like a lilac-red blanket, as if love had flayed him, lively and scorched. The scent of my bearded face dragged him to the maelstrom of my tongue. My echo of spite followed him free till morning. And the wife had warned him about the mermen that crept below the tide or jumped off big seated paddles, that waited behind lurid cliffs to pull men down to the estuary's depths or cause a shipwreck with their venom song. And if ever caught, he'll say that he's been coaxed and vexed, that he meant for none of this to happen, and my kelp blue touch did nothing, proved nothing to him, to others. These queer boys can't get any rest in this depth, lamentous with wake slosh, their skins so mother of pearl, and others somber ebony. Some have never felt sunlight, some absorb darkness from the abyss, laid on tiny grains and pebbles, a Flemish painting of vivid blues, cerulean silks of sand and waves, sapphire, lapis, emerald, wild fish, and cephalopods. The older ones warned them that scales would grow restless, tails twist in tremor, cheeks farouche with first blushes that melt each member down to the cartilaginous core. Bodies have uses other than swimming. If caught in fishnets, things would happen. They've all heard the stories of sailors from land with expert hands that know what to do, where to touch. A merman choir, how we first came to land. Human experience is one of disease. You wouldn't remember us. First crawling out of water, panting for air in fierce spasms. The pain we knew, water no longer being a mother, giving up her gills and growing porous bags to breathe, swapping our one extremity for two, less silver and more skin, found refuge in cracked lamps in the darkness of the ground, then behold, our looks of wonder when facing the first leap of flame. That poem appeared previously in Lighthouse. I should have said that. Wonderful magazine. Mellisin Boys is another poem really love. I haven't read these in forever. This is about male prostitution, and it partially takes inspiration from the figure of the Mellisin, which is a mermaid from French legends, and her descendants are said to have finned hands and feet. Come high tide, the sea filled us with its screams and gave us nightmares. Scuppered our lust, so we grew up tainted, always pining for the wrong men. The bankmen, the office workers, doctors and lawyers have kissed their kids goodnight and come to find us. They know the spot. Lads that would climb mountains for us. Some have waited patiently, saving carefully, hiding the money from their wives. Lost in the burrows and narrow alleys, men came and went until their name grew pale as clouds and slowly faded. They fell for our thinned hands and feet, our scaly legs, called us the nymphed boys of Greek street. Upon finding they'd been sea-lured, shame hit them like a ram's bright head, and they built high pyres of the driest wood for our pain to last long and red. The men that once had bedded us now chained us to the stakes, tucked us in engulfing flame. Before demise we sang to them a song so sweet and blithe they dream of it, and at the apex of a highest note they followed us into the fire and burned with us. This poem was previously published in the Runner Poetry, another wonderful magazine you should check out. A child comes out as a merman. A trigger warning is probably in order because there's a suicide scene. So if that makes you uncomfortable, feel free to just take a break. When right after sunset, darkness landed on our living room like a butterfly on an open flower. Mother didn't bother to switch on the lights and kept watching the telly blasting sinners, sinners. While standing by the threshold to the kitchen, I announced, my voice all jelly, I'm a merman now. And Mother looked for a second, nodded, tucked her lips again into a blanket of silence. The morning after, a leaflet was next to my pillow, with content I could not decipher, pictures as bright as sun-filled bubbles. Mother said if I wanted to swim, to learn how to swim, they'd pay for lessons. Scriptures. You shall not lie with a creature of the sea, for they have no soul, and only by marrying a creature of land may they acquire one. I started taking baths before sleep and went to bed so wet I'd soak the sheets. Then sleeping in the bathtub all night, I joined my legs tight with an elastic band, enjoyed every cramp, every cold shiver. The next day, screams and thumbs out of the bathroom door woke me up as I delayed everyone's morning routine. Over breakfast, Mother insisted. Once more, I was clueless. I said I'd found a new God, one more gentle and tender, one that allowed for slipperiness, mellowness. Mother shook her head, then shouted to go to my room, call me an abomination. They decided to leave me alone, the shadows sewing button eyes on ghost dolls. Once they watched stand up on the telly, their chests shook with so much laughter they couldn't hear a thing. Once the water in my bathtub was all cherry, I tried to stop the flower of my wrists from blossoming. This poem this is a new poem, and it's going to appear in a wonderful anthology of queer writing, both poetry and prose, which is called Queer Life, Queer Love, and it's been edited by Gulnush Noor and Matthew Bates for Muswell Press, and it's dedicated. The whole anthology is in memory of Lucy Jack Reynolds, the trans daughter of one of the people of the press. And so I'm very proud of this project. I think it's a very important project, and whenever the book is out, I think I do hope you'll buy a copy, not so much for my own writing, but just because it's a wonderful, wonderful project. Autumn is the queerest season. When the air is wet and slippery, the men so sickly beautiful and quick to burn. Something boils underneath the carpet of porous orange on Asylum Road, beside the hydrangea smirking Baba Yaga's chicken-legged houses, Suspiria red windows. Mature men in olive, emerald, obsidian jumpers, office suits, walking to post-work grinder dates, by the vigorous maples, reaching for the pullet sun. The men so sickly beautiful, like deers shot in slow-mo dropping slits of bronze fur carcasses. By Brimington Park, the young hipsters braving the brisk air, sleeveless, hairy biceps, walking to post-gym grinder dates at Queen's Road, Peckham, by the Blackbird Bakery, vermin cats standing in rows as if to judge each tryst. And then it happens. The sweetest of voices sings men to the mire of their own mind. Men walk towards the dark, pale fingers pull them in. Laughter is heard, still echoes. And this is another new poem. This was published in 14 poems, which is a queer magazine. Wonderful, wonderful work, and they keep becoming more and more successful. So check them out if you don't know them. I will love a man whose eyes are tempest. His bass will ring inside my head for days until it cracks my skull. His fragrant skin will hinder every smell until no smell persists but fragrant skin, whose oyster mouth closes on a pearl, a prize to catch for the snail of my tongue. In a lift, in a corporate building, in the tall grass by a lake, in the gorse-clenching wind on the Cornish cliffs. The fortune teller on the old Victorian armchair predicts his arms will one day shape in a cocoon, fold the whole of me, till we both explode, cascade, an eclipse of wings. And I'd like to finish with the last poem of my pamphlet, These Queer Mer Boys, The Beginning of Dawn. In The Little Mermaid, dawn is the time when the Little Mermaid actually dies and she transforms into sea foam. So I wanted to give a more hopeful read of that. So here it is. The Beginning of Dawn. In those thin hours when night sheds its worm skin, its polluted armor, when lamplights switch off and go home to some hypothetical realm of lamplights, when amber wrestles with rose and dampens the sky with color, in a city that once whispered, I love you, the same way he did on a ferry boat sulking on the Thames. And that was all from me. And now we're going to hear some amazing, stunning poetry by Wendy Allen. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Serge. That was so beautiful. I've already formed my own fan club and kept on saying, I love your poetry so much, Serge, all afternoon. When Alice mentioned that I could maybe have the opportunity of working with Serge, I thought there was no other person, I think, that was on the surface. We share so much of the same sort of theme. We both talk about sex, and this is when I'll actually give my content warning for every single one of my poems, and they generally all do have a sexual content. But it wasn't just the themes of sex, I think, that struck me as I got to know Serge's work more. I started thinking about my own work in relation to why we write the way we do and what we talk about. We did give this this project a sort of working title of the metamorphosis of the body through pleasure and bliss. So thinking about this idea of how we use our bodies, and we'll obviously talk about this after. So I'm going to start with a poem that's very similar to one of Serge's, with a lot of my poems reference a lover who is faceless and never speaks. This is a portrait of mustard. A portrait of mustard. 1. When I walk into Waitrose, I collide with the burn of mustard in the bread section. It isn't a loaf I want, this sourdough with ginger which I caress to my breast. It's the feeling that I want this more than the sparkling water, coffee beans, tub of hummus, salt and vinegar crisps in my basket. They suddenly crowd me. 2. At first, mustard doesn't appear to be overtly sexy, not like the deep pulse purple of the knickers I bought from Net-a-Porter for this trip to see my lover. It isn't the colour of fever that spreads in 7 seconds when he licks my lips inside the satin trimmer panties. When he looks at me from below, looks straight into my eyes, his lips glossed with the slip of my vulva, then this moment could be the hottest tasting yellow on any chart, sexier than any red or pink could be. 3. There is no lipstick I want in mustard, and lipstick is my usual marker of desire, just as masturbation is my rescue remedy and Vogue my monthly shopping list. 4. This is Eurostar, Paris and the Gare du Nord an hour away. In my mind, I picture just how it is going to be. I'm glad I bought my Mulberry Lily bag in mustard and not oak. Mustard will look so much better with the 4 Breton tops I have brought. 5. A Schoenberg concert at Queen Elizabeth Hall. You reach for my hand as the conductor takes a bow. My tears fall lento. I lick them quick into my lipstick before they drop into your hand. This is mustard to me, this atonal bliss. 6. You feel my nipples through the mustard cashmere of my polo neck when we are in the R section of the bookshop and I have wild Sargasso Sea in my hand. 7. Your cock has nothing to do with mustard or my labia, which cute, sugar pink and glistens. I've never seen mustard gleam, but the moment you pull off my wool mustard socks and kiss the soft part of thigh. 8. When I marry again, I'll wear a mustard velvet suit with Louboutin shoes, Red Riding Hood lips, and I'll remember to wear primer this time so I don't look shiny on the steps of City Hall. 9. Syncopation in America from West Side Story is the purest form of mustard found to date. Nothing epitomizes resilience like syncopation. 10. The bar under the festival hall, 9:39 p.m. The seats sticky from the drink I spill when you whisper in my ear and tell me what you want to do with me later in the hotel room. The hotel room has a mustard throw at the end of the bed that, even when I want you desperately, I will never put my body near. 11. There is no car that looks good in this colour. This is fact. It makes me love it even more. 12. Mustard is that moment when I lift my floral dress and lean over your face. 13. If mustard could say I love you, it would feel like your hair on my hip bone on a Sunday on the first day in spring when it rained all day. 14. Mustard is an underdog. It is plush, velvety corduroy, never silky. It's the hint of resilience. It's the chunky cardigan with the merest flash of nipple underneath. It's the front cover of a book that you fall in love with age 17. The second poem I'm going to read is one that just recently appeared in D-Reader. The pink roll top bath is £995 and says sold. I want to know who has bought it. I grasp a piece of invisible text from Delta of Venus and bite so hard juice runs down to where I'm smooth inside. I'm falling over the edge in anticipation of your mouth. My lips curve like the rim of the roll top bath. They smile, then say, fuck me over the side. Open mouth, soft inside, I swell. Clitoral bulbs freeze framed in slow, they grow lento. I'm an Attenborough nature program. My clitoris evolves from want. Don't stop, you make me summer. Recently, I had a meeting with a Royal Literary Fellow at university, and we were talking about my work. And she asked me really gently one day whether I'd noticed that I tended to set my poems in the geography of outside the home. And since she's mentioned this, obviously I've write my poems in a variety of locations, but it's really obvious that I definitely do set them outside the domestic, which again we'll talk about afterwards. This one is on the train. You wear a t-shirt with the National Rail emblem on. From Chester to Bangor, the carriages peer down on top of the wide-eyed seawall below. You trace your two fingers slow down the curve of my waist to hip bone to the sea underneath. You go down on me, your slated lips taste of waves. I am between blue and breathing. The next poem I'm going to read is about another of my favourite subjects, which is menstruation. I'm really proud of the fact that I write about this. I think that we're trained even now to hide the fact that we menstruate. And I found the idea of mudlarking a really perfect way of describing periods. Mudlarking, what I look like under the shallows. Only the dredge part of me remains. It smells like the end. This period is slow like sediment and meanders instead of flows, bleeds like shit and sticks to the depths of the shallows. This is the bottom of a coffee, a slow draining punishment, the dull lack left at the end. The lustrous first blood has gone, swimming red ribbon sleek in a costume that dyes the departing waters like a menstrual bath bomb. No cider, black starburst bleeds into the clean. The clot at the bottom is dead brown, a pencil end, a stub, a dry felt tip. And now I'll read the poem that Alice mentioned before. And this is another thing that I like to write about in my poems. I focus on the female orgasm. I tend to not write about anything male related. And this idea that a moment that is so fleeting, but so massive. I kept on thinking about this picture of that loads of people have of people surfing, and it's that 1 second and that one image. So again, I wanted to try and create that through this poem. Why do people take photographs of men surfing and not my orgasm as it peaks? We are speechless, floating on a mattress of foam off the shore. My nipples are blush boys as they bob on the slowing wave of you. My hair advert pretty as it moves over your cock like the tide. I like the off-white of afterwards, dirty bridal stains traced on our lips. I want to stay open-mouthed, remain on this high, photographed on this invisible wave. I want to have it framed. Do I smile as your tongue turns circles into crests as I surface? And my final poem is Olives, which was recently published in Damnation, which is a new online publication, but I was really excited because they said they would publish things that were just outside and maybe a bit riskier. So this one has a very strong sexual content, I will warn you. Olives. 1. In rehearsal, I wait on the sofa reading. In truth, I'm by the door as you approach. Count to 20 to make it look authentic. My armpits wet. I like precision, buying a type of olive I know you'll like. We're on a date from The Guardian on Saturday. When they ask if we kissed, I'll think of my dress draped over you, your tongue searching between my labia, an acoustic wall from Zara which doesn't absorb the sounds I make. I push my hair behind my ear, pull it out again. 2. I want to fuck you straight away, suck your cock straight away, you to go down on me straight away. This is my favourite fantasy, always in the hallway. I masturbate to it before we even get into the bath. And when I lie in the afterwards, I'm a Russian doll in the tub, wet inside wet. I push my hair behind my ear, pull it out again. 3. I lie slightly syncopated. There's a marble effect on my skin where your tongue traces. It lowers and crescendos into the straight divided lace of my suspender belt. The lines becoming urgent and picking up pace as you move downwards. My eyeliner runs defiantly, racing to join your mouth inside me. The olives on the coffee table lie, eyes fixed watching us from their untouched viewpoint. I push my hair behind my ear, pull it out again. Thank you.
Wonderful, powerful work. I almost feel proud of you. Not that I'm, not that I'm Wendy's mentor or anything, or that I have any merit in her wonderful writing, but I really do feel proud of you. Honestly, you performed beautifully.
Thank you. Now we thought we would do our questions
Yes.
after our reading.
So let me start with a question. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with you was there are certain expectations that do come into play when anyone other than a straight white man writes. And I feel that applies to women, but also to minorities, Black people, queer people for sure. And it's just that there's certain expectations for the work to be very autobiographical in a way that unfortunately oftentimes translates into a sort of trauma porn. And so how do you navigate these expectations in your work?
When I first started writing last year, I didn't really think about any of this. I just wrote, and I didn't know about the eye of poetry. And so it's only through doing courses and realizes this massive question of which we all have to think about. And I just read this, which I absolutely love, Deborah Levy, and in it she said, it was there that I would begin to write in the first person using an I that is close to myself and yet is not myself. And whilst I'll admit that a lot of the things I do write, it is about me, and I do find that using this kind of I and gives me a freedom of which I can then choose to sort of hide behind it. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about censoring later, but it's a big question because I have to really kind of think about what is it that I want to write about? Do I want to think about how I'm coming across as like I'm a married woman with children? And obviously some of it's really personal, I write explicit poetry, but I do think that this kind of freedom of poetry and the sense of, this freedom to write, we've talked about this, we spoke about it this afternoon, that if I was writing novels, there's a certain sort of, if I was writing fiction, you wouldn't presume that all these things are made. So I think that I just have to sort of debate, but I'm very naive in poetry, and I sort of didn't even think about this when I started to write, and I wouldn't have chosen, I don't think, to write these things had I known all the kind of politics of this behind it. I hope that's okay. And I wanted to ask you, because I have absolutely loved this so much, but I wanted to know, I'm really interested in the merman, and I think what I want to know is, do you think that using the construct of the merman gives you a confidence in order to write? Does it, the removal of the self, we've just spoken about the self in poetry, does that give you a sort of protection in your writing?
I'm not sure if protection, sometimes it allows me a distance, and it allows me to be the truest part of myself at the same time. Now, the merman thing evolved over a period of time. Initially, I just wanted to distinguish myself because, there's lots of poets out there. So, what's new, what's not been done, and talking about queer subjects using mermen and mermaids. And I've always been obsessed with mermaids, so I was just like, it's a type of writing that's in sync with my own personality. It does come naturally. But I think it's never been a subject. It's been a sort of lens through which I look at certain subjects. And because some of those subjects do deal with the predatory nature of relationships, power balances in relationships, and abuse of different kinds. I think it did allow me to write about those things more easily. But I think I didn't think I realized right away what my real subjects were. I think initially I was just talking about, sex, because if you're a queer person, that's oftentimes the easiest thing to write about if you're a gay man. And then other themes emerged, and I started talking more about abuse, the predatory nature of certain power struggles in relationships and outside of them, in communities sometimes. What I realized I'm writing a lot about is the transformative nature of queerness, and how we come from the harshest of situations, and yet we manage to adjust ourselves and to migrate to more to safer lands, and to create new personas. Shouldn't say create new personas, to discover our true personas. And I think all of that, I realized all of that through the merman. Yeah, sorry, it got a bit confusing, my answer.
Not at all. No, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's but I realize, and this is what's been so brilliant about working with you, that I realized through how you spoke about that I think ultimately that's what I'm doing as well. I think I'm creating this kind of space, this idea of this great love affair, not love affair, this like really sexual relationship, which is set outside of my own home. But it's my kind of, I'm creating that space equally. So I think it's only through thinking about this and the personas and the metaphor, that's really helped me come to terms with my own work.
And sex is a very transformative act in nature, isn't it? Because some cultures, some philosophies do think of sex as an exchange of energy. And so it's like you leave some of you into the other person, and some of the other person is transferred into you. So it's such an intimate act. It does change, your nature somehow. And the way you explore that, it's really interesting. And I love that you mentioned the fact that lots of your sex poems do take place outside of the domestic walls. Because how do you think different environments influence the poem, the nature of the poem? What do you think?
I think that, again, I hadn't really thought about this, but at the moment I'm doing a lot of work on Barbara Hepworth and this idea of art. And I'm thinking that I think what I do is I try and place the orgasm as if it's like on a plinth and it's like being viewed in the gallery. Especially that I think it's the why do people take photographs of men surfing? I imagine that point on the top of the wave, that it's like, and my favorite Barbara Hepworth is Pelagos, and I can imagine that moment is Pelagos on that plinth and it's been seen. So I think that, and I also want to make it in a public place because it's not really spoken about. I mean, there is obviously poetry about this and it's not a new thing, but I think that when I look to find poetry, I've always like sort of gone to Anais Nin and things like that, but it's not as open I think that if there must be something in the way that, I mean, I like to place it in, there's always the sea element, which is obvious, but yeah, the garden. I went to York on a weekend with my friends, and we were like peering inside this treasurer's garden. And I think that there's something about the idea of all of these things in a public that I just think it's probably another way of me trying to like sort of write about things that are maybe there's questions about whether, you know, I should be writing about these things so much. It's my turn now. I'm getting sidetracked again now, Serge.
You're doing really well.
Censorship is something that I wanted to talk about. I feel really passionate about the fact we've spoken about, like, as a woman writing about sex. And early on in my writing last year, I was censored really early on, and I had to deal with the fact that in a group of 10 people, 3 people constantly wouldn't like talk about work. They found it offensive. So, and I had to make that decision then to carry on whether I wanted to continue writing about this material. And obviously that's made me more sort of determined to write about it. Now, do you find that if you come across much censorship because some of your poems are explicit, or do you find that it's that you're almost like kind of expected to write in a certain way?
Not so much censorship, or at least not that I'm aware of. So I don't know what goes on in the mind of an editor when they've got my poems in front of them. I mean, hopefully right. But yeah, no, I'm more concerned with being put into boxes and being, you know, stereotyped and things. And I do feel, again, to reconnect into what we were talking at the beginning, if you are not a straight man, not a white straight man, you are very often put in a box. Like if you're a queer man, then the editors want the stereotypically queer poem from you. Like it has to be either a coming out story, or it has to be a sex poem. But it's just like, if I'm a queer poet, any single poem I'm going to write is a queer poem. It could be about whatever. It is a queer poem if it's written by a queer person. Whatever the subject, it automatically is a queer subject. And so this kind of, you know, simplifying of things, which is very often encountered when, you know, when you belong to a certain community, you're expected to sort of represent that community. And I think, especially if you are from another country, I think then you are super stereotyped and you are said you have to write about this and that because you are from that country. And it's just like, no. It's just like, why would I do anything other than what I want to do? No. And let me ask you something else. I'm curious about your influences now. So who are the poets who actually inspired you? You mentioned briefly Anais Nin, but, you know, if you could talk a little bit more about, you know, the voices that influenced you.
My biggest influence is not any poet or writer, and I've spoken about this on a podcast that I did, but my greatest influence is the fact that I was cabin crew for 20 years, and I think that this honesty and this way, the way that cabin crew talk is like unlike anything else. You're in a confined space and you can share everything, and you could go to work with the worst problem in the world and you would always share, you'd know everything about the person that you're working with immediately. And it's that sharing, I think, and that speaking. I think that's probably why I love writing about menstruation, because, you know, you hide the fact you know, going to the toilet with a tampon. In like the working environment that we had, you couldn't hide anything. And I think this honesty and this kind of, you know, all the details you'd share comes across. So that is not really the answer to your question, but I always, you know, I think that it's a really massive part of who I am as a writer, the fact that it's this oversharing, it's like we'll always say.
I love that. If I can just say, I am the kind of gay friend that always carries extra tampons for my menstruating friends. So I, I'm fun to hang out with. Yes. My life is has not been as adventurous as yours. So my influences are actually boring literary influences. No, I adore Richard. He was one of my first mentors when I did Faber Academy, and I took 2 courses with them. And then he was my mentor again on an Arvon course, and I adore Richard. I did the chairing of the Cheltenham Festival this year with Andrew Macmillan, Mary Jean Chan, and Paul Mendes, because Richard recommended my name. So it's a wonderful human being. Then influence, in terms of influences, surely Emily Berry. I wouldn't be the poet I am today without Emily Berry. N. Carson, Sam Sachs, and Richard, of course, John McCullough, Luke Kennard, and Alice Hiller, who's such an important voice nowadays, and does such wonderful work, not just in terms of writing, but in terms of community. But I think, the main thing about these poets is that, yes, they're incredibly talented, but when I talk about Alice, Richard, John McCullough, Luke Kennard, they're also wonderful human beings, very kind and giving, and I think they all are an example for me to look up to. I think we are running out of time, so I think we are going to do a prompt each. So let's get down to writing, shall we? So the first prompt is from me. I would like us to try and write a transformation poem. Now, you can transform into anyone or anything you like. The main thing is that you rely a lot on your 5 senses. How does this transformation feel? Is it painful? What's changing in your body? Why is this transformation happening? Is it a spell, a curse? Is it a genetic mutation, science? Whatever you want, it can be whatever. I would suggest you ground the poem by putting into it at least 5 objects you've got in your room. Don't overthink it. Just, grab 5 objects and just try to see if you can fit them in your poem. And I will give us about 10 minutes, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Get down to writing. Oh, there you go. And pens down. Pens down. I'm going to ask if anyone has something to share, maybe very quickly. No pressure. We are very low maintenance. We are very low pressure here. So if you've got something that you think is, interesting and you'd like to share it, feel free to do so. Alice.
I found it a very freeing exercise, strangely enough. I just wrote my 5 objects and I started writing in the personality of one. And then I went from one to another, and I'm actually starting to write a sort of memoir project about my childhood, which is moving in and out of different moments. And I realized...
But again, no pressure, up to you. Oh, Sarah says, I think it's too early for me to share, but the prompt was really great. Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thank you. I'm sure what you wrote is wonderful. So maybe we can move on to the next writing exercise. Right, Wendy?
I think out of all of this is the part that I'm the most nervous about. I have been doing an amazing course with somebody called Declan Whiffen, who and the course is Cruising Nature, and it's absolutely amazing. He said I could use his quote today, but I'll just explain quickly that Cruising Nature, I have no interest in writing about nature at all, but the way that he approaches it, Cruising Nature is like wandering your imagination, being alert to your desires, the anonymous, the seemingly insignificant, thinking of writing about things with an electric charge, with an openness. I think it's the fleetingness that I really like. And since I've been doing this course, I've been thinking about nature and writing. In fact, I was telling Serge this story this afternoon. It'll be really quick, but I was helping at the Oxford Literary Festival, and I was showing Chris Packham down to where he was doing the signings. And I said, I really enjoyed what you were saying about kestrels. And he said, yes. And then I said, I've just written a poem about kestrels. And he said, oh, is it like Gerald Manley Hopkins? And I said, no, it's really explicit, because my friend Charlie had told me about kestrels and how they're the only birds to hover. And then I imagined this lover who was like a kestrel hovering. Anyway, so this was too much information, as always. But this is the influence of this course that I'm doing, Declan, of nature, incorporating nature. So my it's going to be only 5 minutes because we're running late, and you can always carry on with it. And this is directly taken from Declan, so he gets the credit. When I say nature, what I mean is, and then just let yourself write about anything nature-ish, but also just where does that take you? When I say nature, what I mean is, and that's 5 minutes writing time.
Exercise. And that was such a great exercise. And I must confess myself, I am not nature writer. I am not a big lover of nature poetry. But, you know, that's a really interesting liberating way to think about it. Yeah.
Did anybody get anything interesting? Anything about kestrels?
I got something, not about kestrels, but I started with a bird. And I like how airplanes are just very sophisticated birds. And everything about an airplane comes from nature. You know, the metal comes from nature, the rubber comes from nature, you know. So I just thought, you know, how can I extend Mother Nature doing her work, you know, to these sophisticated forms? Well, that's how I start, and I'm curious where I would take it. But it's an interesting idea. I get excited by interesting ideas. So thank you for that prompt.
That sounds really exciting, actually.
It's I appreciated that, Wendy, because I'm not a nature poet, so it was a great relief to hear you say. But I have written a poem about a falcon, and once I started writing about a falcon, I explored it and researched it, and it became fascinating. And you know, so yeah, I'm not as resistant as I think, although I switch it around to become quite urban and something other than nature. But I haven't written anything about this, but when I say nature, what I mean is a great way in. I'm going to explore that, because I can hear it resonate already. So there's something there, but it's a good thing to react off. So it's a good prompt. It's ignited my interest.
And once again, I just need to say that is Declan Whiffen. If you go and look at Beyond Creatives, is Cruising Nature, because cruising is just a brilliant way to approach, I think, a lot of things. So it's thanks to him, because I did not know what to do. But I find that, like I said, I'm not really into nature at all, but I find looking at it from that approach is really interesting. I think that's it then, isn't it? We're done, aren't we, Serge? I'd just like to say that I've really enjoyed this opportunity. I honestly, today when we met at 3 o'clock, I had no makeup on because I said to Serge, I didn't want to, you know, when you put your mascara on and then you want to put it on again later and it goes all clumpy. So he had to bear with me for an hour with no makeup on, but we've had a lovely time, haven't we?
Oh, please, you looked amazing. You always look amazing. And we had such a good chemistry. I think, and I agree when you say, you know, if I could not have imagined doing this with anybody else. I didn't know you worked really well at the beginning, but once we started talking, you know, it was just like bang. And it's just like we've got this explosive, you know, synergy, and I love it. I think we've built something really good today. Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the wonderful prompt and questions and reading, of course. Yeah, you're amazing. Honestly, you've been doing so well.
Thank you to everybody. I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you for coming along.
Thank you so much, everybody. You've been amazing, and I hope you got something useful from this. Now it's back to Alicilla, I think.
Well, I think I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of us for a fantastic, expansive evening. My sense of possibility has really grown, and I've forgotten that it's November and grey, and I just feel I'm in a really growing creative space that we're making together. So thank you, Wendy Allen. Thank you, Serge Neptune. I can wave one book and offer a PDF of another. And, you know, thank you again, and tune in for our next Voicing Our Silences.